welcome back to another episode of the Next Level Minds podcast. My name is Chris Chapman, and I am blessed to be the host of the Next Level Minds podcast. And if this is your first time listening, then this is a podcast that is dedicated to those who want to reach a next level in their faith, family, fitness, finances, and embrace the American freedoms that we have in this amazing country. And the way in which we help do that is we interview very successful people from all walks of life, and we really walk through their story. And then we also host a number of different solo episodes where I talk about a wide variety of personal development topics, faith-centered topics, financial-centered topics, and then a couple kind of cultural and political topics as well, going into that kind of country and American freedom side of things. And we do have a goal here, and it's really to positively impact over 1 million people by helping them reach a next level. So if you have not done this already, please take the time to subscribe to Next Level Minds on Apple Podcast. Share this episode with a family member, friend, or colleague who you think will get some value out of it. And if you like the Next Level Minds podcast, leave a review on Apple Podcast. Click 5 stars, write a little something. Let me know what you're thinking, because the more reviews you get, I believe the higher I can rank under this category here. So on to today's episode here, and really what I want to talk about is why capitalism works. And for some reason, capitalism can be seen as a bit of a politically charged topic, when in my opinion, it's simply just common sense. So quick disclaimer, and I've shared this multiple times before, but all post comments, likes on my social media accounts and podcast are solely my own personal opinion, and they do not reflect my current employer. For all my social media content and podcast content, all of my opinions are my own personal opinion, and they solely reflect my own opinion, as well as my own company, Next Level Minds, but they don't represent or reflect any views of my employer. So just wanted to say that disclaimer, since this can be looked at as a bit of a politically charged topic here. So as mentioned, I'm going to be talking about why capitalism just makes sense and why it works. And what we're going to go through is really just explaining a little bit more about what capitalism really is, why it works better than any other system in history, and why socialism sounds good in theory, but it really destroys freedom and prosperity every single time. And I'm not going to be talking theory today. I'm going to be talking a lot about like history, results. And if you've been listening to this podcast, you know that this is a faith-centered podcast, and that's where I get all of my political beliefs, cultural beliefs, my mindset, things of that nature. So this is going to have some biblical components as well to back up why I believe capitalism makes sense. So first and foremost, on to section 1 here, where I'm going to talk about exactly what capitalism is, right? And capitalism, by definition, is an economic system that is built on private property, voluntary exchange, free markets, and individual responsibility. And breaking down these simple pillars: private property, you own the fruits of your labor. You work hard and results will happen. Free exchange, no one forces you to buy or sell or work. Free exchange, it's freely up to you. Competition, right? Competition creates innovation. It creates quality. It creates competitive prices. When I'm competitive, you perform better. Like, think about when you've been in a competitive situation. If you have a product or service that your business sells and you have a competitor that's, a couple blocks down from you, and you're like, oh, I need to innovate more. I need to have higher quality. I need to have more competitive prices. Capitalism promotes competition. And then just from a career and entrepreneurship standpoint, capitalism rewards working hard, and it rewards solving problems. And from a biblical grounding standpoint, there's a couple verses and passages here that I believe back up the importance of what capitalism actually is. So Proverbs 22:29 talks about how there's excellence. When you have excellence in work, it leads to prosperity, right? It teaches that a person who is skilled, who is diligent, who is excellent in their work will rise, and they will become, quote unquote, excellent in what they're doing, because they're putting in the skills, the work, the diligence into kind of their work ethic, right? And then Matthew 25, if you look at what Matthew says in that gospel, he talks about the parable of the talents, right? Talks about how God rewards stewardship, how God rewards risk-taking. Matthew 25 teaches us that God expects us to use and utilize the gifts that he gives us, and talks about how you should take responsibility and act with courage and don't have fear, and essentially use your gifts to work hard and create a successful life. And then in Exodus 20, going all the way back to the Old Testament, there's passages in there, and it's actually a commandment. It says, do not steal, right? And it talks about how, private property is a God-given principle. And then some additional verses that I believe back up hard work is Proverbs 10, verse 4, where Proverbs says, a slack hand causes poverty, but the hand of the diligent makes rich. Then you have Colossians in the New Testament says, whatever you do, work at it as if you are working for the Lord, not for men. And then Proverbs 12, verse 11 talks about whoever works his land will have plenty of bread. Bread was considered a, very great item to have back then. But he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. So I'm going to read that again. Whoever works his land will have plenty of bread, but he who follows worthless pursuits lacks sense. In my opinion, worthless pursuits is economic systems that don't work and other things that can lose money for you, like gambling and things of that nature. So a couple biblical verses there, hard work, prosperity, grinding, being skillful, taking risks, these are all biblical principles. Why does capitalism actually work? There's a couple, I think there's, I want to say 5 or 6 things that are going on in my mind right now for this. But first and foremost, I think capitalism aligns with human nature, right? People are naturally driven by incentives. For example, when I had my first job out of college, we would host various competitions. It would be like, if this group does this, then we can leave by this time. Or if this group does this, then we can get a free coffee. If this group does this, then you get a, $20 Amazon gift card, right? People are naturally driven by incentives. And when incentives match productivity, society continues to thrive. And we as humans are meant to provide, right? If that's taken away, I firmly believe that things like depression, anxiety, negative thoughts can creep in because we as humans are naturally driven to produce, to perform, to provide, right? That's how it's always been in human nature. So first and foremost, capitalism aligns with human nature. 2, it rewards problem solving, right? Every company exists because there was a problem. Think about the iPhone, think about Uber, think about something as simple as electricity, think about cars, think about, the airplane, the Wright brothers. These companies existed because there was a problem out there. These individuals who were skillful and who were willing to take a risk said, you know what? I think I have a solution to this problem. And each and every one of these individuals who started these set examples, right? The iPhone, Uber, electricity, cars, planes, they became very, very, very wealthy because of it, because they solved a massive problem. And when you solve a massive problem, you get massive pay. 3, capitalism creates wealth and it does not redistribute it. Apologize. Capitalism creates wealth and it does not redistribute it. Capitalism is something that creates wealth through hard work, through discipline, through grit, through being skillful. It's a system in which, if you have deep skills in areas that pay, you will get a lot of money. And kind of piggybacking on that, but it's its own section, separate section, is capitalism can lift people out of poverty. It's truly the only system that allows you to move through classes. Things like socialism, which in my opinion is really communism in disguise, allows you just to be stuck in a particular class, right? But capitalism gives people the opportunity to lift themselves out of poverty. For example, I had a guest on my podcast who grew up in a very, very tough situation. I think he was homeless by the time he was in middle school or early high school because his parents had him at an early age and they were both involved in drugs, and he had a very, very, very rough upbringing, right? And he was able, through a very, very tough childhood, to get out of that. And eventually he, went to high school, went to college, was very successful from an academic perspective, graduated, had a very strong career in his early 20s, started his own company, and then ended up selling it in his late 20s, early 30s, and became a millionaire from absolutely nothing. But other classes out there, socialism, for example, you're stuck. Versus capitalism, you can essentially move through classes, through hard work, through being skillful, through being determined, through having discipline. Even my example, and my example is nowhere near as extreme as that, but just like most Americans, I grew up very middle class, paycheck to paycheck family. When I graduated, I had maybe a couple $1,000s in assets. Then I had some credit card debt. I had hardly any cash to my name. And within 7 years, and I still have a long way to go, but in 7 years, I've been able to, have an amazing job for myself. I have a multi-six-figure retirement portfolio. I'm blessed to have 2 houses. One of those a rental property. I have a very, very, very strong net worth. And this wouldn't have happened in a class system where I was essentially stuck. Because of capitalism, I'd be able to kind of work my way from being, I'm pretty much almost a negative net worth 7 years ago to now having a very, very, very healthy net worth for my age group, 2 houses, an amazing job, a multi-six-figure retirement portfolio, and things like capitalism provide those opportunities. Capitalism also drives charitable giving and generosity. U.S. is, of course, one of the most capitalistic nations out there. And if you look at the list of the top countries in the world from a charitable giving standpoint, the United States is at the top of that list. In fact, I think from 2008 to 2018, I believe, we were actually at the top of that list as one of the most charitable giving nations, but we're also one of the most capitalistic nations out there. And wealth creation expands the ability to help others. How many times have you seen entrepreneurs that have done massive things, from maybe opening up a school for lower income individuals, or even just giving thousands of dollars, or even providing food? Capitalism creates success, and successful people, it gives you the opportunity through wealth to expand and the ability to help others. Capitalism also protects freedom, which freedom is something that's extremely important to me. That's why it's one of the pillars of this podcast. And in socialism, for example, and especially communism, like, the government controls pretty much everything. But with capitalism, you have control of your economic freedom. You have control of essentially your life and where you want it to be. And a lot of times I see people, well, hey, what about, this person who's making this, or this individual who's making this? And it's a lot of times it's, if you really peel back their life, and of course there's one-off situations, but a lot of times if you really peel back their life and, look yourself in the mirror and say, have I truly done every single thing that I possibly can to provide the most successful life for myself? Majority of the time, these people have to be honest with themselves and say, you know what, I haven't. Even in my own life, sometimes if I ask myself, have I truly done every single thing there possibly is to reach my full potential? A lot of times the answer is no. But capitalism allows you to take control of both your successes and your failures. Again, hard work, right skills equals big pay. And flipping to section 3, the topic of socialism, right? It sounds good. From basic theory, it sounds good. You're like, oh, fairness, equity, everything's free. We have a safety net. There's emotional language out there that's used to kind of hide some of the mechanics, things like centralized control, or but if you really look at it, it's forced redistribution, it's government ownership of the economy, it's loss of private property, it's centralized government control, and you also have to ask, well, who's paying for this? Who's paying for the free? Who's paying for the safety net? Who's paying for the fairness? It's the redistribution of wealth, which is entirely unfair within itself. And I also think that if you look at the historical nature of things like socialism, you have, Soviet Union, which there was a mass famine and there's 20 million people dead after. There's Mao's China, which they had a giant leap forward, and then they had a famine that killed, I believe it was 45 million people. They have Venezuela, which at one point was one of the richest countries in Latin America, and then it collapsed after it started implementing socialism. You have Cuba. Obviously, look at Cuba under communism. And every socialist country eventually leads to shortages, rationing, corruption, government control, loss of freedom. These are all negative things. Shortages, rationing, corruption, government control, loss of freedom. These things are not good. In fact, if you look at the recently elected New York mayor, he stated in an interview that he said, we are unapologetic about our socialism. There are also other issues that we firmly believe in, whether it's BDS or whether it's the end goal of ceasing the means of production. So he kind of quietly slips up right there and just says, whether it's the end goal of ceasing the means of production. So I know him and Trump had a meeting and it apparently went well, right? But these things aren't good. And his quote just kind of quietly said what his end goal is, and that's to cease the means of production. And wanting to slowly start to summarize what we've been talking about today, I also wrote out here just a couple easy ways to kind of simplify capitalism versus socialism. And very simply, it's capitalism equals choice, socialism equals force, and then capitalism rewards success. Socialism punishes it because you're having to redistribute the wealth, and the people who are working hard, providing jobs, providing opportunities for people, solving problems, they're getting punished. They're having to redistribute their wealth to people who are essentially doing nothing. Another thing is capitalism expands the pie. Socialism divides the crumbs, right? Capitalism helps with wealth creation, helps with creating new jobs, creating new opportunities, creating new companies, solving new problems. Whereas socialism redistributes things, it divides the crumbs. And another kind of key summarization here is capitalism says you are responsible for your success, your actions, you take ownership. If you want to be successful, you put your mind to it, you work hard, you have the right habits, the right routines, you invest in the right skills. But socialism says government is responsible for your success. So I don't know about you, but I personally want to be a lot more in control of my success and my longevity of my career and my business and my financial well-being than having the government decide, oh, this is what you're allocated, or this is what you're able to do. I want to have freedom, right? Capitalism says you are responsible. Socialism says the government is responsible. A couple other personal lessons to look back on here is I firmly believe, and you'll know this if you've been listening to the Next Level Minds podcast for a while, that you build your life through discipline, through ownership, through hard work, right? These are capitalistic principles. And socialism doesn't really have those principles. And things like discipline, ownership, hard work, these are God-given skills and traits that people have. And with socialism, you're taking that away. And with freedom of choice when it comes to your success, you have freedom to start your own business. You have freedom to invest into the stock market. You have freedom to choose a career path. And socialism doesn't allow that, right? Capitalism allows things such as building skills, providing value, creating income, taking ownership, climbing out of excuses, and taking ownership of where you essentially want to be in life. So I think as we're fully starting to wrap up, of course, I've shared a lot today about my points, but one of the biggest things I do want to share is that there are a couple quotes from two very predominant individuals. One, Milton Friedman, who is a Nobel Prize winning economist, and he says that a society that puts equality before freedom will get neither, but a society that puts freedom before equality will get a higher degree of both. And then Winston Churchill, obviously everyone knows who that is, had a quote that said, "The inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessings. The inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries." So two powerful quotes, right? One from a winning economist, and you can do a quick Google search to say, economic viewpoints on socialism. Pretty much all of these predominant economists are going to say that it simply does not work. And then you have someone like Winston Churchill who says the inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessings, but the inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries, saying you'll be miserable if you're in a socialism society. So a couple calls to action here is take control of your success, invest back into yourself with books, with podcasts, but at the same time, take action with the right habits, the right routines, the right behaviors. I've shared this before, but I have an episode way back on how to increase your income. And one of the biggest reasons that I was able to do that was because I invested back into myself. I found out what are the skills that I'm naturally good at that make money, right? Outgoing, sociable, negotiation skills, presentation skills, communication. Like these are skills that I'm able to execute in a sales-driven career. And I went all in on learning more about communication, about learning more about effective presentations, about how to build relationships with executives, right? So figure out what are the skills that make you money that you're naturally good at, and then continue to invest back into those. And it's all about mindset too. The Magic of Thinking Big talks about how your success will only be as big as your belief system. It also talks about that whether you think you can or you can't, it's true. So, with capitalism, it rewards having a strong mindset, and it all starts in your mind. Who you think you are dictates your actions, your habits, your behaviors, and your actions, habits, behaviors are going to ultimately influence your entire life. And I also think it's very important to support systems that protect economic freedom. Again, continue to take radical ownership of your career, your finances, your family. We are meant to provide, protect, set the vision, direction, guide, lead, and continue to live out the values that make capitalism work, right? Stewardship, responsibility, innovation, service. And one thing that's recently been driving me, and I shared this on Instagram the other day, but one thing that's really been driving me lately is being the representation of what I want to see in America, right? Driven, physically fit, mentally strong, wealthy individuals. But ultimately, it's on the individual to set the standard, to set the example. And I would challenge you to find a deeper purpose, a deeper why as to reasons behind why you were doing what you were doing. Because on the days that you're motivated, it'll be easy to put in the work. But what about the days that you're not motivated? That's when you tap into your why. So hope everyone enjoyed today's episode on essentially why capitalism works, where we went through how it just aligns with human nature. It rewards problem solving. It creates wealth, not redistributes it. It lifts people out of poverty. And we also, again, touched on biblically why capitalism makes sense and kind of the biblical values that are written in Scripture and how it does align with more of the capitalism approach. And if you have any questions, let me know. Chris Chap on Instagram. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this episode, this is a disclaimer that all posts, comments, likes on all my social media accounts and podcast, again, are solely my own personal opinion and do not reflect my current employer. They are essentially my own opinion and the opinion of the Next Level Minds podcast. So hope everyone enjoyed today's episode. Think about what was said today. Take ownership, and hope everybody has a fantastic week ahead.